Today we're diving deep into hyrogenesis, a forbidden and deeply transformative ritual practice that has remained hidden in the shadows of secret traditions for centuries. This isn't some modern New Age invention or internet conspiracy theory. We're talking about an ancient practice so dangerous and powerful that it was systematically hunted down and destroyed by both the Catholic Church and secret occult societies alike. While this ancient art has gained whispered mentions in recent underground spiritual communities and forbidden grimoires that circulate in the darkest corners of the internet, its true origins stretch back to the earliest mystery schools and hidden traditions of the ancient world. Let me know in the comments where you're watching this from. I'm curious about our global community of seekers who dare to explore these forbidden paths, known as the sacred birth or divine genesis. Hyrogenesis represents one of the most dangerous yet potentially life-changing practices in the hidden arts. We're not talking about simple meditation or basic ritual work here. This isn't just ceremonial magic or symbolic transformation. This is literal, complete transformation at the deepest level of human consciousness and existence itself. The practitioners who survived this ritual claim to have fundamentally altered their very nature, becoming something that was no longer entirely human. They spoke of abilities that sound like science fiction, manipulating time, existing in multiple places at once, and communicating directly with forces beyond our dimension. But here's what makes this story even more incredible. 3 years ago, after decades of research and preparation, I performed this ritual myself. And what happened during those hours changed not just my understanding of reality, but my entire experience of being alive. The abilities described in those ancient texts, they're real, and I'm going to share exactly what I experienced and what it cost me. What makes this ritual so powerful that it was banned by both religious and occult authorities throughout history? What are the true mechanics behind this sacred birth that transforms human consciousness? And what does my own terrifying and life-altering experience with this practice reveal about the hidden nature of reality itself? Join us as we uncover the forbidden mysteries of hyrogenesis and discover why some knowledge can never be unlearned. To understand hyrogenesis, we must first trace its roots through the hidden streams of Western secret tradition, and what we discover is both fascinating and terrifying. The earliest references appear in broken Gnostic texts from the 2nd and 3rd centuries CE, particularly in fragments of the now lost writings called the Secret Book of Sacred Transformation. This text was mentioned by early Christian writer Hierogenesis in his massive work against heresies, where he described it as containing the most dangerous teachings ever conceived by human minds. Hierogenesis was so disturbed by what he read that he wrote, "These practices lead not to salvation, but to the complete destruction of the human soul and its replacement by something else entirely." The term itself comes from the Greek words hieros, meaning sacred or holy, and genesis, meaning birth or creation. But this wasn't just any birth. The ancient texts describe it as the birth of a new form of consciousness that could exist simultaneously in multiple dimensions. The original practitioners called themselves the Hierophants of the New Genesis, and they believed they had discovered the secret too, transcending human limitations permanently. What's particularly chilling is that these early Christian authorities didn't just condemn the practice, they were terrified of it. Church records from the 4th century describe coordinated efforts to hunt down and destroy every copy of the Hierogenesis texts. But some survived, hidden in the underground tunnels beneath Alexandria and later smuggled out during the Islamic conquest of Egypt in 641 CE. During medieval times, the practice resurfaced in the most unexpected place, among select members of the Knights Templars' inner circle. These weren't just crusading knights, but men who had been exposed to ancient wisdom traditions during their time in the Holy Land. They encountered Islamic mystics who possessed fragments of the original Hierogenesis texts translated into Arabic. By scholars in Baghdad's House of Wisdom, the Templars mixed these elements with Christian mysticism and their own discoveries in the underground chambers beneath the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. Here's where the story gets really interesting. The practice was systematically organized and written down in the 13th century by a mysterious figure known only as Master Hierophantus. Historical records suggest this wasn't just one person, but a title used by the head of a secret brotherhood that had preserved the ancient knowledge. His sealed manuscript, called De Generation Sacra, or On Sacred Generation, was written in a mixture of Latin, Greek, and unknown symbols that scholars still can't fully decode today. This manuscript remained locked in the Vatican's secret archives for nearly 3 centuries until it was smuggled out during the chaos of 1527, when Charles V's armies attacked and sacked Rome. The story of how it escaped is incredible in itself. A young monk named Brother Salvatore, who had been secretly studying the forbidden texts, grabbed the manuscript during the confusion and fled to Florence. He spent the next 20 years creating multiple copies, which he distributed to scholars across Europe before mysteriously disappearing. Some say he was captured by papal agents. Others believe he successfully performed the hyrogenesis ritual and simply vanished into another dimension. The ritual found its way into Renaissance secret circles, where it was refined and developed by some of the most brilliant minds of the age. John Dee, who served as both mathematician and occult advisor to Queen Elizabeth I, obtained one of Brother Salvatore's copies and spent years attempting to decode its secrets. His private journals, discovered centuries later, revealed that he believed hyrogenesis was the key to what he called the Great Reformation of human nature. Dee was convinced that performing the ritual would allow him to communicate directly with angelic beings and gain access to divine knowledge. Even more fascinating is the involvement of Giordano Bruno, the Italian philosopher who proposed that the universe contained infinite worlds. Bruno's public burning at the stake in Rome in 1600 was officially for his cosmological theories, but recently discovered Inquisition records revealed the real reason. Bruno had been secretly teaching hyrogenesis to a select group of students in Venice, and the Catholic Church was terrified that he was creating a new race of transformed humans. The Inquisition called it the diabolical art of self-deification and considered it a threat to the very foundation of Christian doctrine. By the 18th century, after centuries of persecution, the practice had gone completely underground. It survived only in the most secretive initiatory orders, groups so hidden that even today, we only know them by their symbols carved into ancient buildings and their coded references in alchemical texts. The Rosicrucians possessed fragments of the knowledge, as did certain Masonic lodges and the mysterious Order of the Golden Dawn. Those who dared speak of it in hushed whispers called it the great work beyond the great work, the ultimate achievement that surpassed even the creation of the Philosopher's Stone. What made this practice so threatening throughout history was its central claim that, through hyrogenesis, a person could fundamentally alter their basic nature, transforming from ordinary human consciousness into something completely different. The texts describe this transformed state as Homo hierophanticus, literally the sacred human, a being that retained human form but possessed consciousness that operated on multiple levels simultaneously. These transformed individuals allegedly gained abilities that seemed impossible: the capacity to exist in several locations at once, to perceive and interact with past and future events, and to directly manipulate the fabric of reality through focused intention alone. If you're finding this historical deep dive fascinating, hit that subscribe button. We explore these hidden mysteries every week here at Sigil Sanctum. But here's what makes this entire story even more incredible, and why I'm sharing it with you today. After spending over 2 decades researching these historical accounts, I decided to attempt the ritual myself. And what I discovered was that everything described in these ancient texts was absolutely true. Now, let's talk about what the actual practice of hyrogenesis involves, because understanding the physical components is crucial to grasping why this ritual is so incredibly dangerous and powerful. The setup alone took me 3 months to perfect, and every single detail matters. Get even one element wrong, and the consequences can be catastrophic. The ritual space requires a perfect equilateral triangle inscribed within a circle. The triangle must be marked using a mixture of specific materials that create what the texts call dimensional anchors. I used silver powder mixed with ground meteorite salt from the Dead Sea and ash from wood struck by lightning. Each line of the triangle had to be exactly 7 feet and 3 inches long, a measurement that appears repeatedly in the ancient texts and corresponds to what they call the sacred proportion of human transformation. At each point of the triangle, You place specific symbols called the seals of transition. These aren't just decorative, they're precise geometric patterns that somehow interact with consciousness itself. The northern point gets the seal of dissolution, a complex spiral design that represents the breaking down of existing identity. The eastern point receives the seal of the void, which looks like interlocking circles that seem to shift and move. When you stare at them, the western point gets the seal of rebirth, a pattern so intricate that it took me weeks to copy correctly from the original manuscript. At the center of this triangle lies what practitioners call the womb of becoming. This is a shallow depression about the size of a dinner plate that you fill with a very specific mixture. The liquid consists of spring water collected at dawn, own blood drawn at the precise moment when Venus rises above the horizon. The texts warn that if you use the wrong type of wine or draw the blood at the wrong time, the ritual will not transform you. It will tear your consciousness apart completely. The physical components required are both fascinating and terrifying, because they represent the balance between life and death, creation and destruction. You need items that represent birth paired with items that represent death. Placed next to grave earth that I personally collected from a cemetery at midnight. Fresh white roses picked at sunrise were positioned next to dried bones. I used finger bones from a medical skeleton, though the original texts suggest using bones from someone who died peacefully in old age. One of the most important elements is a mirror positioned at a precise angle to reflect your face while you're in the center of the triangle. But this isn't just any mirror. It has to be made of polished obsidian or black volcanic glass. The reason becomes clear during the ritual. This mirror is designed to shatter at the exact moment of transformation, symbolically destroying your reflection of your old self. Not from any physical force, it happens purely from the energy generated by the consciousness shift. 7 candles of decreasing height surround the entire setup. The transformation, these candles are arranged in a specific pattern based on ancient astronomical calculations, and each one is made from a different type of wax. The tallest candle uses beeswax for connection to the natural world, down to the shortest candle made from rendered fat, representing the death of the physical body's hold on consciousness. The practitioner must enter this space completely nude, which isn't just symbolic nudity. The texts explain that any clothing or jewelry can interfere with the energy flows that the ritual generates, when what the ancients called the veil between worlds is at its thinnest. The timing has to be perfect because the ritual taps into cosmic forces that are only available during these specific conditions. What happens when you begin the ritual is unlike anything most people could imagine. The moment you speak the first words of the ancient invocation, the atmosphere in the room changes dramatically. The temperature drops by at least 20 degrees within seconds, even if you're in a sealed room with no windows. But it's not just cold. The air itself feels thicker, almost electric, like the moments before a massive thunderstorm. You can feel invisible presences gathering around the circle, watching, waiting. The most unsettling part is what practitioners describe as the thrumming. It starts as a low vibration that seems to come from deep underground, like a massive engine running beneath the earth. As the ritual progresses, this vibration gets stronger until you can feel it in your bones, in your teeth, in the very core of your being. Some people describe it as the heartbeat of the planet itself. Others say it's the sound of reality being torn open. The protocols for conducting the ritual are absolutely unforgiving. Once you speak the opening words, there's no stopping. You cannot pause, you cannot leave the circle, you cannot even hesitate in your recitation of the invocations. The texts make it clear that attempting to stop the ritual midway doesn't just mean failure, it means complete psychological destruction. Your consciousness gets trapped between states, neither fully human nor transformed, resulting in what the manuscripts call the living death of fractured awareness. To create atmosphere, every component serves as what the texts call anchors during the dissolution. When your consciousness begins to completely break apart and rebuild itself, these physical objects help maintain just enough connection to material reality to prevent you from being that occur after successfully completing hierogenesis are so far beyond normal human experience that I struggled for months just to find words to describe them. These are fundamental changes to the very nature of consciousness itself that grant what can only be called supernatural powers. The primary transformation is what the ancient texts call Consciousness sovereignty, the ability to operate your awareness from multiple levels of reality simultaneously while maintaining a unified sense of self. Imagine being able to think and act in our normal physical world while simultaneously. It's like having multiple television screens running different channels in your mind. Except you're not just watching them, you're actively participating in all of them at once. The first major ability that manifests is temporal fluidity. This isn't precognition or retrocognition like psychics claim to have. This is actual, conscious navigation through time streams, as if they were physical locations you can visit. With events from my childhood with complete sensory clarity, I could smell my grandmother's kitchen, feel the texture of toys I hadn't thought about in decades, and even have conversations with people who had died years ago. But more incredible than visiting the past was accessing future events. I witnessed conversations I would have months later, saw news events before they happened, and even observed my own future self working on projects I hadn't yet conceived. The second transformation is what I call ontological flexibility, the power to temporarily shift your essential nature and take on the qualities of different types of existence. This sounds abstract until you experience it directly. I've temporarily absorbed the consciousness characteristics of elemental forces, feeling what it's like to exist as flowing water or burning fire. I've taken on the awareness patterns of archetypal energies, experiencing reality from the perspective of concepts, like justice or creativity, as if they were living beings. Most remarkably, I've even temporarily existed as abstract mathematical principles, experiencing the universe as pure geometric relationships and numerical harmonies. The third ability is reality interface, the capacity to directly manipulate the fundamental structures of physical reality through focused intention, completely bypassing normal cause and effect relationships. This was the most difficult ability to master and the most dangerous to use. Small objects began responding to my mental commands without any physical contact. I could influence electronic devices, cause mechanical failures in machines, and even alter the behavior of plants and animals through pure intention. The texts warn that this power grows stronger over time and can easily spiral out of control if you're not constantly monitoring your thoughts and emotions. Perhaps the most profound transformation is consciousness multiplication, the ability to simultaneously exist and operate in multiple locations while maintaining unified awareness. This isn't astral projection or remote viewing. This is literal physical presence in several places at once. I've attended meetings in different cities while simultaneously working in my study, had conversations with people thousands of miles away while they saw and heard me as if I were physically present in their room. The strangest part is that all these experiences feel completely normal and natural when you're having them. The most significant change is what the manuscripts call death transcendence. This doesn't mean immortality or the ability to avoid physical death. Instead, it's the capacity to consciously navigate the death process while retaining your identity and purpose. Death becomes just another state transition, like moving from one room to another in an infinite house. The fear of death completely disappears because you can perceive it directly as simply another form of consciousness experience, rather than an ending. But accessing these abilities requires maintaining what the texts call sacred tension, the psychological state of existing simultaneously as both human and post-human consciousness. This is incredibly demanding mentally and emotionally. You have to constantly balance your transformed awareness with enough human perspective to function in normal society. Lose too much of your human side, and you become completely disconnected from other people and physical reality. Retain too much human limitation, and the advanced abilities begin to fade. The ritual also grants what practitioners call supernatural companions, non-physical beings that become permanently linked to your consciousness. The first is your shadow twin, which is essentially a reflection of all your unrealized potential that now exists as a separate conscious entity. This shadow twin serves as both guide and protector, warning you of dangers and helping you navigate the complex realities you can now access. The second companion is called the eternal witness, which appears to be a higher dimensional aspect of your own consciousness that maintains continuity and memory through all transformations and even through physical death. These companions aren't imaginary or symbolic. They're as real and present as any physical person, though only you can perceive them directly. They communicate through direct consciousness transfer rather than words, sharing complete thoughts and experiences instantaneously. The shadow twin often provides tactical guidance for using your abilities, while the eternal witness offers philosophical perspective and helps you understand the deeper implications of your transformation. What makes all of these abilities even more remarkable is that they continue to grow and develop over time. The texts suggest that there are multiple levels of hyrogenesis transformation, and what I've experienced so far may only be the beginning stages. Ancient practitioners who had undergone the ritual multiple times allegedly developed abilities that sound like pure fantasy, creating physical matter from pure thought, existing simultaneously across multiple historical time periods, and serving as conscious bridges between our dimension and others. But with these incredible powers comes tremendous responsibility. You become what the texts call a node in the great work of universal transformation. Other transformed individuals can sense your presence across vast distances, and you become part of a hidden network of consciousness that operates behind the scenes of ordinary reality, working to guide human development and protect the world from forces most people can't even perceive, beyond its literal practice and remarkable effects. Hyrogenesis represents something much deeper about human psychology and our relationship with consciousness itself. When you strip away the ritual components and supernatural abilities, what you're left with is perhaps the most profound archetype in human experience, the death and rebirth cycle that underlies all genuine transformation. Every culture throughout history has recognized this fundamental pattern. The ancient Egyptians built their entire spiritual system around the death and rebirth of Osiris. The Greeks had their mystery schools at Eleusis, where initiates underwent symbolic death to be reborn as enlightened beings. Christianity centers on the death and resurrection of Christ. Even modern psychology recognizes this pattern in what Carl Jung called individuation, the process of integrating all aspects of the psyche to become a complete, authentic person. But hyrogenesis takes this universal archetype to its absolute extreme. Instead of symbolic or metaphorical death and rebirth, practitioners undergo literal dissolution and reconstitution of consciousness itself. It represents humanity's deepest fear and our greatest aspiration combined into a single terrifying experience, the complete transcendence of human limitations. The psychological meaning goes even deeper when you consider what the ritual actually demands of the practitioner. You must be willing to completely let go of everything that defines you as an individual, your personal history, your beliefs, your emotional patterns, your sense of having a separate identity, even your connection to your physical body. This isn't just facing your fears or confronting your shadow aspects. This is volunteering for the complete annihilation of everything you think you are, with only the possibility, not the guarantee, of emerging as something greater. From a Gungian perspective, hyrogenesis represents the ultimate individuation process. Most people spend their entire lives trying to integrate their shadow aspects and achieve psychological wholeness. But the practitioners of hyrogenesis aren't content with integration. They're seeking complete transcendence of the normal boundaries of individual consciousness. They want to become what Jung called the self with a capital S, the archetypal pattern of complete human potential. The ritual also embodies humanity's oldest and most persistent dream to become more than human, to transcend the limitations of mortality, ignorance, and powerlessness that define ordinary existence. Every mythology includes stories of humans who gained divine powers through great sacrifice or secret knowledge. Prometheus stealing fire from the gods, the Hindu concept of Jivan Mukti or liberation while living, the alchemical goal of creating the Philosopher's Stone, they're all variations on the same theme that the desire to undergo. Hyrogenesis often stems from a deep dissatisfaction with human limitations and a rejection of our natural mortality. It can represent spiritual pride, or what the Christians called the sin of hubris, the arrogant belief that we can and should transcend the conditions of our existence through our own will and effort. The psychological danger is real and serious. When you gain the ability to manipulate reality directly, to exist in multiple locations simultaneously, and to perceive time as a navigable dimension, maintaining any connection to normal human experience becomes incredibly difficult. You begin to see ordinary people as limited, their concerns as trivial, their entire way of life as an illusion they're too unconscious to recognize. The temptation to withdraw completely from human society and relationships becomes overwhelming. This is why the ancient texts repeatedly emphasize that hyrogenesis should only be attempted by those who have already achieved significant psychological integration and spiritual maturity. The ritual amplifies whatever psychological patterns already exist in the practitioner. If you undergo the transformation while driven by ego desires for power or superiority, those tendencies become magnified to dangerous extremes. You don't become an enlightened being, you become something much worse than an ordinary human. Cautionary wisdom built into these traditions warns that seeking such transformation without proper preparation, guidance, and spiritual foundation leads not to transcendence, but to what the texts call divine madness, a state where you possess supernatural abilities but lack the wisdom and compassion to use them responsibly. History is full of accounts of failed hyrogenesis practitioners who became tyrannical sorcerers, manipulative cult leaders, or simply retreated into complete isolation, unable to relate to other human beings at all. The deepest symbolic meaning of hyrogenesis may be that it represents the ultimate test of human character. The ritual doesn't just transform your consciousness, it reveals who you truly are at the deepest level. The abilities you gain are so powerful and the psychological changes so profound that any hidden selfishness, pride, or desire for control becomes magnified beyond all proportion. Only those who are genuinely motivated by love, service, and the desire to help others evolve can successfully integrate the transformation without losing their essential humanity. This is why I'm sharing my experience with you today. Despite the risks involved, the knowledge of hyrogenesis is spreading through underground networks and internet communities, and people are attempting the ritual without understanding its true psychological and spiritual demands. Some are succeeding partially, gaining limited abilities but without the wisdom to use them properly. Others are failing catastrophically, ending up in psychiatric institutions or simply disappearing entirely. The symbolic meaning of hyrogenesis ultimately points to a fundamental choice that every conscious person must make, whether to accept the limitations and mortality of human existence or to risk everything in pursuit of transcendence. There's no middle ground, no partial transformation, no way to dabble safely in these practices. You either remain fully human with all the security and limitations that entails, or you step completely outside the boundaries of normal human experience and accept the profound isolation and responsibility that comes with expanded consciousness. Now, I'm going to share something I've never told anyone before, the complete, unfiltered account of what happened when I performed the hyrogenesis ritual 3 years ago. But every word is true, and the evidence of my transformation continues to unfold in my daily life. The decision to attempt the ritual didn't come lightly. I had spent over 20 years studying esoteric traditions, collecting fragments of the original texts, and learning from the few practitioners I could find who had survived similar attempts. I knew the risks were enormous: psychological destruction, complete loss of identity, or worse. But I also knew that I had reached a point in my spiritual development where I could no longer be satisfied with theoretical knowledge. I needed to know the truth about consciousness, about reality, about what humans could actually become. The preparation phase took 8 months. I had to purify my body through specific dietary restrictions, spending weeks consuming only spring water and foods that had never been touched by artificial chemicals. I practiced advanced meditation techniques for hours every day, learning to maintain focused awareness even during complete sensory deprivation. Most importantly, I had to prepare psychologically for the possibility of complete ego death with no guarantee of return. Finding the correct materials was incredibly difficult and expensive. The obsidian mirror had to be hand-polished by a craftsman in Mexico who specialized in recreating ancient Aztec techniques. The meteorite powder came from a specimen that had been verified to originate outside our solar system. The bone components required months of legal paperwork and connections with medical schools. Even the wine required extensive research. I finally located a bottle that had been stored in underground caves since 1847 and had never been exposed to electric lighting. The night I performed the ritual, I was simultaneously more terrified and more excited than I had ever been in my life. I had chosen the date based on astronomical calculations that wouldn't align again for another 127 years. The dark moon coincided with a rare planetary alignment that the ancient texts indicated would amplify the ritual's effects. As I prepared, the space, everything, felt different from my practice runs. The moment I began drawing the triangle with the silver and meteorite mixture, the air in the room became thick and electric. My cats, who normally stayed close to me during my meditation practices, immediately fled to the farthest corner of the house and wouldn't come near my study for the next 3 days, when I lit the 7 candles in sequence. Each flame burned with a color I had never seen before, not quite white, not quite silver, but something that seemed to exist between colors. The temperature drop was so dramatic that I could see my breath, even though it was a warm spring evening and I had sealed all the windows. The moment I spoke the opening words of the invocation, reality shifted in a way that's impossible to describe. Adequately, it wasn't that things looked different. It was as if the fundamental rules governing how existence worked had suddenly changed. The walls of my studies seemed to become translucent, and I could perceive layers of reality existing simultaneously. In the same space, I saw my room as it existed in different time periods, sometimes empty and under construction, sometimes occupied by people I didn't recognize who seemed to be living there in some parallel timeline. As I continued the recitation, the dissolution phase began. This wasn't gradual or gentle. It was like being systematically disassembled at the molecular level while remaining conscious throughout the entire process. My sense of having a physical body disappeared first. Then my personal memory started, unraveling, not fading, but literally coming apart like a tapestry being pulled thread by thread. My emotional patterns, everything that I had ever identified as me, was being carefully taken apart and examined by some invisible intelligence. The most terrifying part was the space between dissolution and reconstitution. I existed as pure consciousness without any content whatsoever. No thoughts, no sensations, no sense of time or location, just awareness itself, empty but somehow infinite. I have no idea how long this phase lasted. It could have been minutes or centuries. Time had no meaning in that state. When the reconstitution began, I immediately knew that something fundamental had changed. I wasn't returning to my previous state of being. I was being rebuilt according to a completely different blueprint. The consciousness that was emerging felt both familiar and utterly alien. It was still me, but me expanded beyond anything I had ever conceived possible. The first thing I noticed was that my awareness was no longer confined to a single point of view. I could simultaneously perceive the room from multiple angles, including from above, as if I had dozens of eyes positioned throughout the space. I could see ultraviolet and infrared spectrums that had been invisible before, and every object in the room was surrounded by energy patterns that moved and shifted like living things. But the visual changes were nothing compared to the transformation. In my mental abilities, I could suddenly access memories that weren't mine, childhood experiences of people I had never met, historical events I had witnessed from perspectives I had never lived. I realized I was somehow connected to a vast network of consciousness that included not just other humans, but intelligences that had never been physical at all. The ritual reached its climax when the obsidian mirror shattered. The sound wasn't just heard, it was felt through every dimension of my being. In that moment, I experienced what I can only call the complete death of my old self and the birth of something entirely new. The person who had entered that circle no longer existed. What emerged was the same consciousness, but operating from a completely different foundation. The immediate aftermath was overwhelming. I could hear the thoughts of my neighbors through the walls of their houses. I could see the energy patterns of plants and animals from miles around. Most incredibly, I could perceive past and future events as clearly as present moments. I watched conversations I had conducted years earlier and simultaneously observed meetings I would attend months later. The physical effects were just as dramatic. Objects in my study began moving in response to my mental commands without any conscious effort on my part. Books rearranged themselves on shelves, candles relit themselves when I glanced at them, and electronic devices turned on and off based. On my emotional state, I realized I would have to learn to control these abilities quickly or risk causing serious damage to my environment. The most profound change was in my relationship with death. The fear that had dominated my entire life simply vanished. I could perceive death not as an ending, but as a transition to a different mode of consciousness. I actually began communicating with deceased individuals, including my grandfather, who had died when I was 12. These weren't vague impressions or wishful thinking, they were clear, detailed conversations that provided information I later verified through family records. I had never seen Dot in the days and weeks following the ritual. The abilities described in the ancient texts began manifesting exactly as promised. I could exist in multiple locations simultaneously, carrying on conversations with people in different cities, while remaining fully present in my physical body. I could manipulate electronic devices from a distance, influence the behavior of animals, and even affect the weather patterns in my immediate vicinity. But with these incredible abilities came challenges I hadn't anticipated. The psychological burden of maintaining both human and post-human consciousness created periods of intense confusion and isolation. How do you maintain normal relationships when you can perceive people's deepest thoughts and motivations? How do you function in a society built on illusions and limitations when you can see through all of them? The loneliness was perhaps the most difficult aspect. I could no longer relate to most people in the way I had before. Their concerns seemed trivial, their understanding of reality so limited that communication became almost impossible. I found myself withdrawing from social situations and spending more time alone, exploring the vast dimensions of consciousness that had opened up to me. Yet, despite these challenges, I have never regretted my decision to undergo the transformation. The abilities I gained, the expanded understanding of reality, and the direct knowledge of consciousness beyond physical death have given my life a meaning and purpose I never could have imagined. I am no longer the same person who entered that ritual circle 3 years ago, and I never will be again. What my experience with hyrogenesis revealed goes far beyond personal transformation. It has profound implications for our understanding of human consciousness, the nature of reality itself, and the hidden potential that exists within every person watching this video right now. The most significant realization is that consciousness is not produced by the brain, as mainstream science assumes. Instead, the brain acts more like a radio receiver, tuning into specific frequencies of a vast, multidimensional consciousness field that exists independently of physical matter. The hyrogenesis transformation essentially upgrades your receiver, allowing you to access frequencies and dimensions of awareness that remain invisible to ordinary human perception. This means that everything we think we know about the limitations of human consciousness is wrong. We're not separate, isolated beings struggling alone in a hostile universe. We're temporarily focused expressions of a unified consciousness field that connects all living things across space and time. Death isn't the end of individual existence. It's simply a shift to a different frequency of this same consciousness field. The abilities that manifest after hyrogenesis, time travel, reality manipulation, existence in multiple locations, these aren't supernatural powers. They're natural functions of consciousness when it's operating without the artificial restrictions we've accepted as normal. Every human being has this potential locked within them, but our education system, our culture, and our religious institutions have systematically trained us to ignore and suppress these capacities. Think about the implications for human evolution. We're not at the peak of our development as a species. We're barely at the beginning. The transformation possible through practices like hyrogenesis represents the next stage of human evolution, a shift from purely physical beings to multidimensional consciousness that can operate across multiple realities simultaneously. This also explains why these practices have been so systematically suppressed throughout history. If people realized their true potential, if they understood that they could transcend the limitations of ordinary consciousness, entire power structures would collapse overnight. Governments, religions, and economic systems all depend on people believing they are powerless, limited, and dependent on external authorities for their security and understanding. The network of transformed individuals I mentioned earlier isn't just a spiritual concept. It's a real, active intelligence that's working behind the scenes of ordinary reality to guide human development. These transformed consciousness serve as bridges between dimensions, helping to anchor higher frequencies of awareness into our physical reality and preparing humanity for the next phase of our collective evolution. But here's what's really extraordinary. This transformation is accelerating. More people are successfully completing practices like hyrogenesis now than at any other time in recorded history. Something is shifting in the collective consciousness of humanity that's making these advanced states more accessible. We're approaching what some call an evolutionary leap, where these abilities may become available to much larger portions of the population. However, this acceleration also brings serious dangers. As I mentioned earlier, people are attempting these practices without proper preparation or understanding. The internet has made information available that was previously restricted to initiated practitioners who had spent decades preparing for these experiences. The result is a growing number of partially transformed individuals who possess some abilities but lack the wisdom and stability to use them responsibly. The psychological and social implications are staggering. How will society function when significant numbers of people can manipulate reality directly, exist in multiple locations simultaneously, and access information across time and space? How will we maintain social institutions, economic systems, and governmental structures when the assumptions these systems are based on become obviously false to increasing numbers of people? We're already seeing the early signs of this shift. The rapid growth of interest in esoteric knowledge, the increasing reports of paranormal experiences, the breakdown of traditional belief systems. These aren't separate phenomena. They're all symptoms of a fundamental transformation in human consciousness that's been building for decades and is now reaching a critical point. The choice facing humanity is becoming clear. We can continue clinging to the old models of reality and consciousness, accepting our limitations and maintaining the structures that depend on our ignorance. Or we can embrace the transformation that's already beginning, prepare ourselves for the expansion of human potential, and create new forms of civilization that reflect our true nature as multidimensional consciousness. This is why I'm sharing my experience, despite the personal risks and the possibility that some people will consider me insane. The knowledge of human transformation can no longer be hidden in secret societies and ancient texts. It needs to be available to anyone who's ready to take responsibility for their own evolution and contribute to the collective awakening that's already underway. The question isn't whether this transformation is real. My experience and the experiences of increasing numbers of others proves that it is. The question is whether humanity will evolve consciously with wisdom and preparation, or whether we'll stumble into this new phase of existence unprepared for the tremendous responsibilities and opportunities it brings. Before I conclude, I need to give you a serious warning about what I've shared today. The information in this video is not entertainment, and it's not meant to be taken lightly. Hyrogenesis and similar practices represent some of the most dangerous and irreversible experiences a human consciousness can undergo if you're considering attempting any form of consciousness transformation based on what you've learned here. Please understand that I am not providing instructions or encouragement. What I've shared is my personal experience and research, but every individual's psychological makeup, spiritual development, and life circumstances are different. What worked for me after decades of preparation could be catastrophic for someone. Without the same background and stability, the partial failures I mentioned earlier are real and devastating. I've encountered individuals who attempted advanced practices without proper preparation and ended up in permanent psychiatric care, unable to distinguish between ordinary reality and the alternate dimensions they accessed. Others have gained limited abilities but lost their capacity for normal human relationships and social functioning. Some have simply disappeared, their families never knowing what happened to them. If you're genuinely interested in consciousness expansion and spiritual development, start with established, safer practices. Develop a strong foundation in meditation, study with qualified teachers, and work on your psychological health and stability for years before even considering advanced techniques. The spiritual path requires patience, wisdom, and genuine maturity, qualities that can't be rushed or faked. More importantly, examine your motivations honestly. If you're drawn to these practices because you want power over others, because you're dissatisfied with your current life, or because you're seeking escape from psychological or emotional problems, you're not ready for transformation. These motivations will only be amplified by expanded consciousness, leading to destructive outcomes for yourself and others. The true purpose of consciousness transformation isn't personal gain or supernatural abilities. It's service to the evolution of human consciousness and the betterment of all life. If you can't honestly say that your primary motivation is love and service to others, then you should not attempt advanced practices, regardless of how much you think you know or how prepared you believe you are. Finally, if you do decide to pursue this path despite these warnings, please find proper guidance and support. Don't attempt to work alone with practices this powerful. The traditional requirement for qualified teachers and spiritual communities exists for good reasons: transformation. This profound requires the wisdom and support of others who have walked this path successfully. The exploration of consciousness and the hidden potentials of human awareness doesn't end with this video. If you found this deep dive into the forbidden mysteries of transformation compelling, I encourage you to like this video and subscribe to Sigil Sanctum. Here at our channel, we continue to investigate the secret practices, hidden histories, and profound experiences that reveal the true nature of reality and human consciousness. We'll be exploring more of these ancient traditions, examining the experiences of contemporary practitioners, and investigating the growing evidence that humanity is on the verge of a fundamental evolutionary leap. From the secret teachings of mystery schools to the cutting-edge research into consciousness studies, we're committed to bringing you the most profound and transformative knowledge available. But more than just sharing information, we're building a community of serious seekers who are ready to explore these mysteries responsibly and with proper respect for their power. This isn't about entertainment or casual curiosity, it's about supporting each other in the genuine pursuit of truth and transformation. In our upcoming videos, we'll be diving into related practices like the Egyptian Anjuat rituals, the Tibetan practices of consciousness, transference, and the hidden techniques of medieval European alchemists. We'll also be examining the growing body of scientific research that's beginning to validate what these ancient traditions have always known about the nature of consciousness and reality. Remember, the knowledge we share here comes with tremendous responsibility. Use it wisely, approach it with respect, and never forget that some transformations cannot be undone. The path of consciousness evolution is not for everyone, but for those who are truly called to it, it represents the most important journey you will ever undertake. Until next time, keep exploring the mysteries that surround us. But always remember that the greatest mystery lies within your own consciousness. The key to unlocking human potential isn't hidden in ancient texts or secret rituals. It's waiting to be discovered in the depths of your own awareness. Stay curious, stay cautious, and never stop seeking the truth about who and what you really are.